The IAQA Australia podcast was created on the lands of the people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to all First Nations people and recognise their enduring connection to the land, water and air, which are vital to the health and well-being of all people and of future generations. Welcome back to the IAQA Australia podcast. I'm your host, Julian Colangelo. It's been a while since our previous podcast. Apologies for that. It just seems everyone seems to get busy this time of year, and projects like this get put on the back burner. So today we're revisiting the first in our Lunch and Learn series, which is a webinar we did with Bryon Price on the role of HVAC systems on indoor air quality. So before we get to that, we have a little bit of indoor air quality news. First, let's talk a little bit about our friends at Safer Shared Air project. So some of you might have come to our conference we had a few months ago, and we had Plum Stone there from the Safer Shared Air project talk to us about this. So the report was recently presented in Australian Parliament. I've got a bit of a summary here. The report calls for immediate action to improve indoor air quality across schools, healthcare facilities, workplaces and aged care homes. Because clean air isn't just about comfort, it's about inclusion and public health. The report emphasises that nearly 50% of Australians live with chronic health conditions. For these individuals, breathing shared air in poorly ventilated spaces can mean heightened risks of infection and even exclusion from public life. The report positions clean air as a basic human right and urges action to make indoor environments safer and more accessible. Here are the key recommendations. Establishing national indoor air quality standards, centralising oversight through Australia's Centre for Disease Control, encouraging a community-wide effort to improve ventilation and filtration. To read the report, head to saferairproject.com and follow the links. And speaking of safer indoor air, and thank you to Claire who shared this on LinkedIn, but New Brunswick in Canada has become one of the first regions to formally adopt ASHRAE 241 standard, which is the guideline for controlling infectious aerosols indoors. It's really a groundbreaking standard because it provides a framework for improving air quality in public and private spaces. In a recent mandate letter, New Brunswick's Minister of Health, Margot LePage, outlined the province's plan to implement advanced air quality measures in schools, healthcare facilities and public buildings. The adoption of ASHRAE 241 ties into the broader effort to strengthen public health resilience post-pandemic. So what does that mean? Increased ventilation, mandating airflow standards to reduce airborne pathogens, enhanced filtration, promoting technologies like HEPA filtration and UVC disinfection, and pandemic preparedness, establishing protocols to activate enhanced air cleaning during disease outbreaks. So adoption of ASHRAE 241 isn't a legal requirement, but it's quickly gaining traction across multiple sectors. The US federal government has shown interest in aligning with ASHRAE 241, especially in public buildings and healthcare facilities. The White House's 2022 push for improved indoor air quality has paved the way for adopting standards like this. These initiatives are definitely gaining momentum, and it's going to be interesting to see how governments, businesses and the community approach air quality and safety. And this really ties into our presentation today with Bryon Price, the role of HVAC systems on indoor air quality. So this is a recording of the webinar, which is available on our website, the video webinar, of Bryon Price's presentation back in September 2020. Now, if you don't remember, we were in the midst of something called COVID-19, and we didn't really know what a post-COVID world would look like, especially the role of HVAC systems. Today, we have a bit more of an idea of what a post-COVID world will look like, and we certainly have the blueprint for that in the ASHRAE 241 standard. And as Bryon talks about, HVAC systems also have a role in providing healthy indoor environments during events like dust storms and bushfires, which were certainly a concern in 2020. And his presentation provides insights into HVAC design, operation and maintenance, and how these systems can be configured to deal with these types of environmental challenges. So enough for me, let's get into Bryon's presentation. Bryon Price is a professional engineer with a long and notable experience in building services. He is the Strategic Development Director for the AG Coombs Group of Companies. Bryon is Chair of the Board of the Facility Management Association of Australia and Chair of the FMA's Knowledge and Advocacy Portfolio Groups. He is a long-standing member of the board of ERA and the board of ARBS. He was also the co-chair of International Well Buildings Institute Force on COVID-19 and other respiratory infections. Thank you very much for tuning in. Now here's Bryon Price.
Yeah, one of the upsides out of the current circumstance is that there is a real focus on indoor air or indoor environment quality and HVAC and all of that, and anything that actually gets people to look at those systems and get a sense of what quality is something that we're very much in favour of promoting. So now's the time to very much start explaining some of these things and look at what we can do to improve the indoor environment with better systems. In the last couple of years, our capital cities here in Australia have seen dust storms, bushfires, heat waves, and now, of course, the coronavirus. And it's all causing significant challenges to how HVAC systems can provide a healthy indoor environment. Today's presentation talks mainly about managing HVAC systems during these challenging events. It also talks a little bit about how HVAC systems can be modified to better cope with these circumstances, and perhaps a bit of a touch of how things might look post-COVID, although, as Julian suggested here in Victoria, you really wonder whether anything will ever be post-COVID. So let's just step through, if I can get this to work, let's just step through each of these particular areas. I haven't got a lot of time to cover what's a fairly broad base. I'll aim to leave some time at the end for some questions. We also have a number of references at the back as well, which will be in the presentation, which hopefully you'll find useful as well. And as Julie mentioned, the presentation will be available after the session today on the website. So in December 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago now, the bushfire smoke was so bad in our major eastern seaboard cities that air quality exceeded hazardous levels. It affected public health, both outdoors. It also affected air quality indoors, even to the extent of setting off fire alarms and putting people out in the street, which is exactly where you didn't want them to be. And I think what we've identified is this is not going to be a one-off. It's really interesting that back in February, you really got the sense the world had really pivoted around climate change, and the bushfires in Australia were a fairly significant event in all of that. So it won't be the last bushfire smoke event we see in our major capital cities. What can be done to manage these? Like all these things, there needs to be a plan in place. There is a level of relative predictability about this. We don't end up with such horrendous bushfire events in our major capitals. We don't wake up one morning and there it is. And so there's the opportunity to have a plan in place. There's quite a bit that can be done if you've got a plan in place, not a great deal to do if you haven't got a plan in place. They are relatively predictable. And so in the first instance, it's really about building owners and operators being cognizant of the fact that they can monitor outdoor air conditions and them becoming a little bit more understanding around what air quality index ratings are and paying attention to all of that. There's also a whole issue around the systems in the buildings and what they can and can't do as well. But there are a number of sources, of course, you can get the AQI readings from, and it's something that should be written into procedures in buildings. Ideally, buildings can also be equipped with air quality sensors as well. That is sensing the air quality that's coming into the buildings. And most modern building management control systems have this capacity if the sensors are installed, so people can be monitoring that. And indeed, you can put alarms on these things as well. So what can you do with the systems if these things are predicted to happen and the outside air quality is starting to deteriorate? Well, the first thing is that outside economy cycles and any night purge cycles should be disabled on the building. And these are the systems that bring in large amounts of outside air to minimise energy consumption usually. And the building should be set to run back on minimum outside air rates and therefore minimise the potential for contamination. And sometimes this is not as straightforward as it seems. It might not just be the flick of an electronic switch. There are other things that need to be done. So again, you've got to prep for all of that. From an air filtration perspective, generally modern buildings have something like a G4 pre-filter and maybe an F7 secondary filters. Smoke particles typically in the 0.1 to 0.3 micron range. Those sorts of filtrations will remove about 60% on days of, say, poor air quality, maybe to very poor air quality. What that really means is you don't get a huge deterioration of indoor air quality as such. and recirculation rates and what have you will keep indoor quality reasonable. But when you get to a point of very, very thick bushfire smoke, certainly beyond hazardous level, that's when the indoor air quality starts to suffer. And certainly there are a couple of filter options that are practical and some less so practical. And we certainly had a lot of inquiries after the February events around what could be done with air filtration. The first thing that people go to is HEPA filters, the high efficiency particulate arrestant filters that are installed in healthcare facilities. Great go-to, if you like, but typically really difficult to retrofit into a commercial building setting. The specialist housings, changes to fans, a real energy impact in terms of operation. These are heavy-duty things that typically can't be retrofitted back into buildings. The other thing that people are starting to look back again at is electrostatic precipitators or electrostatic filters, which were certainly common back in the day when I started my career in building services well into last century. They use an electrostatic charge to pull particulates out of the air. They are large in a spatial sense and therefore quite difficult to retrofit into building plant rooms, but they don't have the same impedance of airflow and therefore the same impact on energy efficiency. And they are not cheap. The other option is to upgrade standard filters, going from say an F7 to an F9. Might be possible in some existing systems with the existing fan arrangements and controls arrangements. And if you change the filters out more regularly and didn't let them load up, there'd be a relatively smaller effect on the energy efficiency, but there'd be still some impact as such. Other people are looking at perhaps seasonal filters, maybe having something better during the summertime or something that's ready to go if the events are predicted. But it is important to have something in place by way of a plan. If these things are likely to happen in the future, which we believe they are, there needs to be a plan in place to be able to be triggered by air quality readings and obviously these events occurring. In 2009, I think it was 2009, there was a single dust storm that affected Sydney, Brisbane and Canberra. And there was a similar storm back in 2005 and I think earlier in the century as well. Again, these are like bushfires events that seem to be happening with increasing regularity and something that we can plan and prepare for. And so in terms of how we're advising our facilities management clients around this, there's three categories: is what you can do before the storm, what you do during the storm, and what you can do after the storm. And again, as for the bushfires, prior to the storm, it's about monitoring of air quality levels and getting a take on what's happening and how things are changing. It's also about seeing systems back to run on minimum outside air again. There's also the opportunity with some buildings to fit temporary pre-filtration. There are certainly some buildings in Sydney where we've installed pre-filter racks and people are able to put some pre-filtration up over outside air grills or just inside those. And that's something that's sitting there waiting, ready for the next major dust storm. During the dust storm, it's really important that there are people on site and they're monitoring what's happening with air filtration and the dust loads on air filtration. Quite a significant issue in a lot of buildings are what we call fly-by-wire issues. So the building management control system might be monitoring pressure drops across filters, but is it accurate? Is it giving you an accurate indication? It's important that you know these things before a dust storm and don't rely upon the machine that goes ping to go ping. It might not do the right thing at the right time, but dust levels on air filters need to be modified, and as I say, those systems need to be in place and regularly checked. Obviously, if buildings have got CO2 sensors, the quality of indoor air needs to be checked regularly as well, and airflows throughout the building. Areas of particular note that we discovered after the more recent dust storms that got significantly affected, not so much from an indoor air quality perspective, but just from a building services perspective, areas like switchboard rooms and lift motor control rooms often end up with high dust loads because there's no filtration to those areas, and that then causes other risks in the buildings. After the dust storm, obviously attending to filters, having spares on site, being able to change out quickly. Cooling towers are often an issue with mud and sludge build-up that then goes on to affect air conditioning systems and their ability to maintain conditions. Sensors become contaminated, and again, there are issues with VESDA systems and those sorts of things as well with regard to dust build-up. But again, you've got this opportunity to plan for those events. The next one I'll touch upon quickly is heat waves, and as we know, living in Australia, this is a regular occurrence. They are now these days much more reliably predictable, and we often have a summer where there's periods of 3 or 4 days predicted where temperatures are going to be in the high 30s or low 40s, and that's when the problems really occur. Heat builds up in the building and eventually exceeds the HVAC system's capability to support internal conditions, and these suffer. And so every building and its systems are somewhat different. It really is a combination of the particular building physics and the building systems. But eventually, most buildings don't have enough spare capacity, and they do suffer after a period of time. Aside from increasing shading on buildings, improving glass, and all the things that you would like to do, there are things that can be done to maximise the HVAC system's ability to cope with heat wave conditions and reduce the energy energy impact, which is often a real issue with heat wave conditions as well. In some buildings can be programmed for these sorts of things to happen in a pre-programmed sense. So effectively, you can flick the switch, or you can have a set of pre-existing conditions to make this happen. Others need to be adjusted. But certainly, in modern buildings with building management control systems, there are a lot of options around adjusting set points, accommodating a higher set point earlier, so therefore it takes some time for the heat to build up, modulating fan speeds to adjust the thermal effect in the building, even modulating the way that chill water and condenser water systems operate, changing run times, introducing night purge systems or early morning cool down systems. And there's obviously the attitude around when things start and stop. So there's quite a lot that can be done with heat waves. And there are a number of buildings in Melbourne and Sydney over the last couple of years that we've pre-programmed with those sorts of controls which are bespoke to the building, and have seen the buildings cope much better, both in an internal conditions sense, but also in terms of energy efficiency during hot periods. So following on from bushfires and dust storms and heat waves, COVID-19 is now really putting a focus on HVAC systems and indoor ventilation and the role that these play in managing the disease. We're all still learning about the transmission mechanisms of COVID-19, but there is definitely a growing body of scientific opinion that airborne transmission via aerosol particles may be an important infection mechanism. These small particles that are believed to be able to sit in the air, suspended in the air for a number of hours, that clearly brings the HVAC system into play. The opportunity for those to be entrained into HVAC systems, moved around the room, and recirculated back into the building is a very real thing that we need to contend with. So there are a number of credible sources of advice and guidance that are now available around the operation of HVAC systems during the COVID period. The American ASHRAE, the UK SIBSI, in Australia AMCA and ERA have all got advice around how best to configure and operate HVAC systems during COVID-19. And generally the advice runs to a couple of different themes. Ensuring spaces are adequately ventilated and outside air rates are maximised. Ultimately, it's about dilution. Managing airborne infection is not a new science in itself. It's something we've done in healthcare facilities for many years. And at its most fundamental level, it is about dilution and dilution rates. It's also about return air paths. It's also about ensuring that we do have ventilation in buildings, often in commercial buildings in particular when there are tenancy changes. Return air paths are disrupted, door grills are taken out, airflow rates are upset, and you don't get the ventilation that you think you might have. Humidity is another area that some believe has an impact on the transmission of the virus as well. And generally accepted advice at the moment is keeping humidity in the zone of 40 to 60% RH. It's worthwhile noting that most air conditioning systems, certainly in commercial buildings, don't directly control humidity. That's almost a side effect out of the psychometric effect of managing air temperature. Good maintenance and system cleanliness is often one of these things that doesn't get looked at. But again, if something is well maintained and kept clean, you've got correct operation and air paths. There's a range of guidance that's coming out around cleaning and cleanliness, whether that be around room surfaces and what have you, if there's a confirmed case. When it comes to cleaning HVAC systems, very difficult to clean in a disinfection sense. There's a lot of places in the air conditioning system that are very difficult to get to, ductwork and VAV units and dampers and what have you. But certainly the opportunity to change filters. A lot of systems these days have coils that are actually in the rooms themselves, so chilled beam systems, induction units. Again, the opportunity to clean these because they can become dirty and clearly need cleaning in that space. There's also a reality versus perception piece with all of this because it isn't a precise science as such. And so a lot of the work we're doing with facility managers at the moment is around messaging and helping them assure their tenants that the building systems are operating correctly, the filtration's clean, the systems are clean, and the things providing the very best indoor quality that it can. So perception versus reality is also an issue that is coming up in a lot of this. In terms of modifications and the sorts of things that we're certainly looking at with our clients, airflow rates, that ventilation piece in the room where return air grills are placed, ensuring that we've got adequate ventilation in spaces are things that are being looked at. Where you might go with air filtration, mentioned before around heaters and some of the other options. It's still a matter of conjecture as to what role HVAC plays by way of recirculation and whether or not virally loaded airborne particles can be recirculated and put back into an occupied space. It's something that there's a whole range of people around the world looking at, but it's certainly a matter of conjecture. There are a number of our clients looking at UV systems, whether that be cool coil systems or upper room systems or even in dark systems. There are a range of challenges with each of those in terms of retrofit. And again, a bit of an emerging science as that might be applied to HVAC systems in normal buildings. Lifts obviously were a major issue in the first instance and still are in terms of being a social distancing pitch point. People are now looking at retrofitting ventilation systems back into lifts. And again, going very much last century where these things were much more commonplace. Common areas such as toilets and kitchens, again, social distancing pitch points, but areas that typically haven't been well ventilated and managed in terms of airflow. These are the things that the people are looking at as well, along with a range of other issues around, touch-free experience and doors that open themselves and what have you. It's also about general cleanliness of air and people looking at more general disinfection systems and what have you. Where this all might go in the future is somewhat interesting. Clearly, where we go by way of rating systems, I think there'll be an increased uptake of the well rating system, and they've issued quite a lot of information with regard to safety ratings in buildings and what have you to help facilities managers and others better manage the space. What I've done at the end there, if you care to go to our website, there's a range of COVID-19 related advisory notes. These are technical effective notes with respect to the COVID-19. There's also one on bushfire, smoke, dust storms and heat waves. Again, hopefully useful advice to facilities managers and people looking to operate and even design these systems. There's a set of references at the end there as well, which again are pretty up to date and hopefully useful as well. It's interesting when you think about where all this might go in the future. There's a whole lot more to it than HVAC, obviously. The role that buildings play in the future is still very much up in the air. Whether social distancing will be an enduring issue, what that means for the design of indoor spaces, indeed what buildings might actually get used for in the future with people working remotely and perhaps only coming into buildings a couple of days a week. So that might very much change the way that buildings are used and people access and people reside in buildings, and therefore the way that the air distribution systems need to be designed and maintained as well. So there's a great deal we don't know about the transmission of the disease, and there's a great deal we don't know about how buildings will adapt to the new normal post-COVID-19.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Bryon. Well, I've got a question for you, actually. What do you think a post-COVID HVAC system might look like, and how will that design change?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about. There's certainly a lot of research happening around the world with that. My view is that at the most fundamental level, it is an issue of ventilation in the space. That's where the issue is. And whilst ventilation rates and dilution are important, traditional air conditioning systems are very much drop, throw and mix, and air might be coming into the room at, say, 12 or 14 degrees. It's mixing with the other air in the room, and therefore you're going to get conditions up around your 20 degrees, and then it's being drawn out of the room at a return air point somewhere. It may very well be that displacement ventilation systems, which see the air introduced low in the room, and you've got an induced convection effect up past people that will typically take whatever contamination is up and away from people. It may very well be that we'll see a lot more of those types of systems designed. There already are quite a few buildings designed that way. But again, we may see a move to something much more like that displacement ventilation system as a more sort of de rigueur design feature. It's interesting when you look at some of the large, particularly the large bank headquarters buildings. They are designed around a central atrium with open spaces, but quite often have displacement ventilation. But the ability for air to be displaced up through the building and contaminate different floors, that might be something that is not considered in the future. It might be very much floor by floor. The move to 100% outdoor air systems, which are already recognised by well ratings schemes and Green Star rating schemes and what have you, whilst there may be an energy penalty in some times of the year, it may well be we come back to that. Filtration systems, what they might look like in the future as the science emerges around what role recirculation has with all of this. Again, there's an energy penalty in a lot of these things as well. Again, if you go back to February and where we were around climate change and that being our focus, I really wonder whether or not we'll go forward, whether it'll be acceptable to be able to be dealing with the COVID-19 with an energy penalty. We'll need to find a way that we continue on the road of low energy buildings, but somehow deal with that indoor air quality issue around COVID-19. How we manage humidity in buildings, again, there's a lot of opportunities in systems to better manage humidity if the facts come out that really support that optimal zone of 40 to 60% RH. How you might do that more effectively in the future, again, is something to be looked at. UVGI systems and how they might get applied and designed into buildings, aside from where they currently typically fit around coil disinfection or upper room disinfection in healthcare settings. It'll be interesting to see how this ultimately moves forward. I was in a webinar recently where one of the world's leading experts in indoor air quality was advocating that in the future we might measure commercial space by cubic meters, not by floor area, on the basis that the greater the volumetric space around people, typically the better the indoor air quality. So there's a whole bunch of moving parts that can be considered. I suppose one of the key issues is just how the science emerges around airborne transmission and how HVAC systems play into that.
Hi everyone, Julian again. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, the full recording is available on our website, IAQAAaustralia.org.au. Wishing you all the best over the holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.